Hey everybody, welcome to the Bridgewater Chess Club's YouTube channel. Today we're going to look at a game sent to us by Connor. The game was played on leechess.org. It's a 10-minute game with a 5-second increment. For the purposes of my review, I'm going to keep the inline notation on, but I'm going to disable the computer analysis. You should do the same when you review your games. It's important that you give them a once-over and try to assess what you did right and wrong on your own, and then you can utilize the computer analysis to help make sure that your calculation lines up pretty much with what the computer analysis is saying. Our hero is the white pieces, and without further ado, let's get into the game. Connor starts us out with d4, and let's see, xdedm, let's call him Dedm, replies with d5. Connor goes bishop to f4, knight to c6, knight to f3, bishop to f5, pawn to e3, knight to f6, bishop to b5, and a6, pawn to a6. Let's stop here for a second, because here we've kind of hit our first threat, where Dedm is threatening Connor's bishop here. In looking at this opening, first of all, let me just mention that both players are doing a good job getting their pieces developed, getting their minor pieces out on the board, trying to control the center. Connor, I think you did a good job assessing the threat of bishop threatening the pawn on c2. And all it takes is this knight move over to b4, and suddenly you've got a double threat on the pawn on c2, which is a little bit frustrating. There's ways to get out of this. There are ways to deal with this, but because, well, how do we get rid of arrows, guys? Here we go. But because your dark squared bishop is on f4, you're going to have a bit of a tougher time to get out of this. You might have to do something silly and non-intuitive, like moving your knight to a3 to protect this pawn. So, with all that said, guys, someday I'm going to figure out how to get rid of these arrows and circles. Not today, clearly. There we go. All right, magic. I love it. But in this case, you've got a nice pin going here, and I think if I were in your shoes, Connor, I would take this knight, which is what you did. So you have the bishop and knight trade-off. You can make an argument here that Dedm did a better job with that trade, because the general thinking is that bishops are better than knights just by a little bit. But honestly, I don't think that really kicks in until you're at like some crazy chess level. I think knights are a little bit trickier than bishops, especially when you're just getting started. And I think that you should really be focused on trading when it comes to knights and bishops, making sure that you're trading a piece that's not so great on your side for a piece that's really good on your opponent's side. And again, in this case, I think, Connor, if you are assessing that double threat, if the knight made his way to b4 and having the bishop here lined up on c2, I think you did the right thing. Crap. All right. So after that trade, Connor, you go pawn to h3, and that's too passive. You should be focused on finishing your development, getting your king castled, focusing on king safety, and getting all your pieces out on the board. I think what you're doing here is trying to prevent bishop to g4, which creates a relative pin to the queen on d1. But all it's going to take is getting your knight to d2, and then suddenly you have a defender of the knight on of the knight on f3, and then you can work on moving your queen out of the way. So I don't really see the need for this, and I think your move would be much better spent developing pieces. And actually, you could swing the pendulum in the entire other direction and move pawn to c4. Usually, if you start out pawn to d4, which you did, pawn to c4 is a real complementing move. There's a ton of different lines that you can get yourself into doing that. So, yeah, you'd probably lose a pawn. I have a feeling that Dedm would probably take it. But so what? then Dedm's got 3 pawns lined up in a row. And, it ain't tic-tac-toe, people. So that's not good. You want your pawns to be in a nice chain, defending themselves and helping to defend other pieces. You don't want them all in a row. Connor, you would just end up going Pac-Man mode on these things as soon as you were able to get a rook over here. So something to think about is that first, too passive, and even though this seems like you're just dropping a pawn for nothing, you're dropping a pawn for good compensation because Dedm's pawn structure would be a mess. All right, but Dedm responds pawn to e6, making way for the dark squared bishop. And Connor, you move knight to e5, and that's an awesome place for your knight. And I really want to see your knight go there as soon as you're done developing all of your pieces. I can't tell you how many times it's bit me in the butt that I start getting a little bit too aggressive, launching an attack, my king's not safe, and all of a sudden my opponent finds a good counterattack. And if I had only just castled and focused on king safety and then launched my attack, I would have been in much better shape. So get yourself castled, get your knight out here and developed, get this pawn moving, and then you can get this juicy square on e5 for your knight. Dedm responds bishop to d6, and Connor moves to c3. So, I guess that's developing, so I want to make sure that, that's a good call. You should be focused on developing. But if you were going to do something passive again, I would have loved to see the castle. Get your king safe. I know that his bishop and his knight's here, but, you're not going to castle queenside at this point because the b file is wide open, and Dedm, I'm sure, would put a rook there. So you're going to castle kingside. Let's go ahead and do it and get your king nice and safe. Oh, the other option, by the way, if we want to just stick with an aggressive game plan, man, get that pawn. Get the pawn on c6. You're attacking the queen, and if Dedm takes your bishop, take the queen. I think that the most likely response to knight to c6 here is that the queen's going to go to d7, and you're going to go right back to e5, attacking the queen. You're probably going to see this trade of bishop takes and then your bishop takes, but this is a great square for your bishop too. You're attacking the pawn on c7. You can take the knight on f6, upsetting the kingside pawn structure as well. So you've got a lot to work with here. So if you find yourself in a position, if you decide you are going to get aggressive and move your knight here, then, take it all the way. Be aggressive. Be aggressive. But you have instead very aggressive and then very passive. So let's see. And then Dedm must have heard me because he decided that he was going to get aggressive and move his knight to a really good square. Knight to e4. I don't like to use the F word too often, but I'm flummoxed. I don't really understand the bishop to h6. I think I do know what you were going for when I looked at this game before I started recording, and bishop takes, and if you look at Connor's time signature, Connor took just a few seconds to move the queen to h5. I think what Connor was doing is trying to threaten checkmate, but there's just so much that can go wrong here. The first and foremost is that the bishop could just take the knight on e5, and then that's going to upset your pawn structure, or Connor's pawn structure. The other thing, and I think even maybe the better move, arguably, is bishop to g6. And then really, the only move here you've got is either queen to g4 or queen to f3. You can't move the queen to h4 because Dedm's queen is going to take it. You can't move the queen to g5 because you've got the knight over here that can jump over. You can't move the queen up to f6. You've got the queen and the knight. So again, you've just got these two squares. So let's say you move over to g4, and then at that point, queen to f6, double attack on the f2 pawn. That's going to be really, really hard to deal with. So I think that sequence of events is not going to go, or shouldn't have gone, in your favor, Connor. But again, I like that you were putting a plan together, that you had a plan of attack, and it was certainly possible that your opponent missed it. But I think you have to work on thinking through that move order and seeing if there's a way for your opponent to get out of it. Because in this case, your opponent had lots of ways to get out of this scenario. But instead, Dedm decided to castle, which was a really bad move on his part because the king is now kind of wide open. You have this really well-placed knight. You've got the queen right here, and Dedm's king's just right out in the open. The pawn structure is a mess. I think what happened here is Dedm sort of fell into that, oh, I better castle because my king wasn't very safe. But if we take a look, his king was doing okay. I think that he would have been much better served taking the knight on e5 and then getting his king to d7 and then moving the queen out somewhere, maybe trying to trade queens, make the game a little bit less complicated. If we kind of run through that scenario of takes, and then here where, Connor, you'd be in a position where you have to trade for all intents and purposes, then you're just down a piece, you're in a tough position, and even in this scenario, so here, and then, Connor, let's say you did decide you were going to castle, that's a pretty safe king right now, and I think that this game would have been pretty in the bag if this played out. But that's not how it played out. Instead, we saw Dedm decide that he was going to castle, and we see Connor decide that he's going to get aggressive again, which is exactly what you should be doing. And at this point, Dedm decides, okay, that knight's way too good. I got to get him out of there. And that makes sense. And Connor, I see that, hang on, let me look back at the time. So you're at 8:38 and then 8:27. So you only took about 10 or 15 seconds to decide that you were going to take the bishop on f5. And that makes complete sense because you want to get the rook to g1 and you want to start pushing your advantage here and getting that attack moving. The reason that I'm pausing is that you didn't take a lot of time to calculate what would happen. So what happens if you take this instead, and then you have the bishop going probably to g6, and then taking the pawn on g6. I'm not saying that would have been the better move order by any stretch, but I don't think that you took enough time to really calculate your options. I think in this scenario, you went with an instinctive move. You had so much time on the clock. There would have been no harm in taking your time and trying to calculate that. And that's what's going to make you a much better player, is when you find yourselves in these critical situations where you have to make a decision, take your time, calculate it out as far as you can. And as long as you're doing that on a regular basis, you're going to be able to calculate out farther and farther and farther. And that's going to really improve your chess game. With all of that said, that whole preamble out of the way, I think that this is a move I would have made too. That it's just so glaringly obvious that get this G file wide open so that you can get your rook over here, so that you can really put some pressure on Dedm's king. Okay. In this scenario, you're moving the bishop. The bishop looks like it's moving up to block. And you threw the rook in right away. And I think that I'm considering whether or not it makes sense to take this pawn, forcing Dedm to take back with the pawn on f7. Because you haven't developed your knight and your king's still in the middle, I think that wouldn't be in your best interest. But I think if you're, if you get your knight out here, if you get your king up to e2 and you're trying to trade this good knight with your knight that's currently on b1, I think you would have been in a much better position to deal with that. But hey, you know what? I'm not going to cry over spilled milk. You're doing great. All right. Perfect. The bishop has put itself in a pin, and you are now attacking the bishop with a pawn. That's I think that's as textbook as it gets. I don't understand that move at all. I guess in the sense that, you know what, I do understand that move. Dedm thinks you're going to take the bishop, and maybe he's thinking he's going to take back here with the pawn on h6, which gives his king some level of protection. He's got connected pawns. So just to play that out, so he's thinking this, and then, yeah, it's not a great structure, but it's better than what it was. So I can get there. The problem with Dedm's thinking is that there's no reason you can't take the pawn on h6. This pin still exists. That's kind of a scary move, but and it's a little bit hard to see, but you've got that pin going, so why not take the pawn? All right, hang on. Let's see what really happened here. Okay, pawn to h4. Love it. Pawn to f6. I don't love it, but I understand it. Rook to h1, and that is a blunder. And the reason that it's a blunder is because, Connor, if I can read your mind for just a moment here, I would be willing to bet that in your head you were thinking this bishop's dead anyway, that there's no way for this bishop to get out of the jackpot it finds itself in, and so it's not a big deal. I can move my rook to h1, and I've got a nice battering ram behind my queen when I do decide to take this bishop, and I'll be good to go. However, if Dedm had seen that bishop takes e3 was an option, and if Dedm had tried to calculate that out a little bit, he would have seen that this all but kills your attack. That, even if you decide that you're going to start out with, whatever kind of check, this check, then no big deal, back here. And then even if you decide you're going to go here, no big deal. I've got all of my rooks and my queen ready to defend my king. And you still got to work on taking the bishop here. So, Connor, you did an absolutely good job, punching up from behind and getting yourself in a position where, even though you were down material, you had the advantage because Dedm castled, exposing his king. But in this scenario, you need to recognize that you need to open up this file. That's where that's where you're going to have success, and that you should have taken this bishop right away and then moved your rook over to h1 and fought your way up the h file here. But luckily, Dedm missed it. You were able to take the bishop anyway. You're able to move up as expected. And then Dedm made another blunder. And it's a blunder that I can get behind. That when you see an opportunity to attack your opponent's queen, it's really tempting to just go ahead and do it. But you've got to make sure that it's an attack that's worthwhile, that it puts you in the best position possible. And in this position, it's not good. Not good at all. So the king moves to f8. And Connor, you remember that the knight was there. Look at that. The knight moves to d2. I'm not sure why, but there it is. And then the queen moves to e7. And that's just giving away the rook. And the king goes back to f7. That makes sense. Good check. And then, yeah. At this point, Dedm decided to throw in the towel. But really, it's just, check here. Over the, the king's over to f7. You get a nice fancy rook for nothing. You can go ahead and trade that. You haven't moved your king at this point, I don't think, so you could castle queenside and be pretty safe. So there you go. Great game, Connor. Well done. Good victory. I think your takeaways here are absolutely get your king to safety and develop all of your pieces. And when you find yourself in those critical positions where you have some options, whether if we go back here, I think this is probably the first real critical position of the game. Again, I think you made the right move, but seeing that it took you 10 seconds to make that move, I would call that lucky instead of good. Get used to calculating. And then again here, I think you made a snap decision that bishop's dead one way or another, so who cares? But you really needed to make sure that you had a way in to keep pressing your attack. Instead, you made a little bit of a passive move again and allowed the bishop the option to take the pawn on e3, which would have stymied your attack. So don't be so passive. Get your pieces out there and keep having great games like this. Really good job, Connor. Congratulations again, Connor, for a great game. If you'd like to have your game reviewed, feel free to reach out to me via my Facebook page at Bridgewater Chess Club. You can also email me at bridgewatermachessclub@gmail.com. The Bridgewater Chess Club is a free community program available to all ages and all skill levels. We generally meet Wednesdays at the Bridgewater Public Library from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Be sure to check out our Facebook page where all of our events are kept up to date, and feel free to stop by. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.